Arc 5, Chapter 51, Malice in Trickery.
Why you making that face for? Something bothering you?
Just before reaching the control tower, Ricardo spoke to the knight, who wore a stiff expression. Halting in his step, Julius raised his brows in surprise.
How surprising, Ricardo. I never expected you to be concerned about others' worries.
Don't mistake that phrase for something else. The one that's with you is just me. Even if you said something, it'd be a secret from the lady, too.
You're not wrong, huh?
Though it was rare, Ricardo often made correct observations of people. If not for that, he wouldn't have been able to take up his role as the head of the Iron Fang, as hearing only fragments of his splendid career would lead one to say so. Looking at only oneself and ignoring the surroundings was no way to stay alive. Slave, mercenary, this applied to both roles.
Now that's quite the brutal brat. Even so, I'll play the role I'm supposed to, so you can depend on me. I'll take the son-in-law's consultation.
That son-in-law is scary. I do not hold any such strange feelings for Anastasia-sama.
What's that? The lady's affair, huh? Maybe it's about Mimi. Besides, she hasn't managed to convince the lady yet.
Julius smiled bitterly. This gesture of quietly shaking his head was graceful as always, but this time he lacked precision when choosing appropriate words. And at that gesture...
Something's off about the recapture of the city hall. The lady agrees too. She hasn't heard much about it, but I'll force it all out.
It seems you're rather unforgiving.
Of course, it's life-threatening. Don't want to leave my back to someone who's in the dark. Are you gonna fabricate some kind of excuse as a rebuttal?
No, it is indeed as you say. It was I who was mistaken. Certainly, I am increasing our risk by hesitating to speak.
Julius earnestly nodded to the pursuing Ricardo and curved his brows with elegance. However, no more words came out of the mouth of his troubled self. Facing that attitude, Ricardo got out of his own numbness and let out a sullen voice.
Why are you stopping there? It's sad that you're so lost. Just let it out of your mouth and frankly speak it all out. Can't you do that? Just what's stopping you? Julius.
I apologize. I am unable to decide which words would be appropriate to express what I want to say. The reason for my worry is just as you guessed. The Archbishop that was encountered in the city government building, Roy Alfard of Gluttony, was that person. Unmistakably. But...
Julius confusedly cut off his words halfway as uncertainty wavered in his yellow eyes.
Similar to the other Archbishops, perhaps Gluttony also possesses an inexplicable ability. The power of eating memories, eating names, was noticeable back at the time of the battle with the White Whale. However...
Julius!
Ricardo called out the moment he felt unease touching his very core, and Julius instantly recognized the meaning behind it. The atmosphere trembled, all sounds disappeared from the world, and a light rose into the sky. There could only be one situation in which that extraordinary light would pierce the night sky. It must be the aftermath of a slash by the strongest individual in this world.
Such a fancy move. Am I correct to assume it's the Sword Saint, huh?
Reinhard, isn't it? It seems that Subaru and the others have already come into contact with greed. We cannot afford to make any delays either. We must also hurry.
When one Sin Archbishop was attacked, the other Sin Archbishops did not come together in defense and retaliation. Julius and Ricardo sped up their pace, aiming for the approaching control tower.
So what's so strange about that Gluttony? Didn't you say he was an extraordinary monster?
Ricardo tapped on his shoulder in hopes of hearing Julius's story to its conclusion and interrupted Julius's forward momentum. Julius turned his head and looked back, with a gaze which denied what he had just said.
No, although it does seem like he was not completely serious, the skill of Gluttony does not seem to exceed human knowledge itself. If we both are his opponents, then that may just be enough for him. However, The enemy's creepiness is a completely different subject.
His unavoidable worry itself was because of the fact that Julius himself did not know the extent of its true creepiness. And it was Julius's unusual selfishness which made him avoid mentioning this argument in the previous strategy meeting. Julius considered Gluttony to be an unfathomable and eerie opponent, but still believed that he must cross swords with him. Ricardo did not know the reason behind it. It could not be said that even Julius clearly knew either. They kicked the stone pavement and passed the curve of the street to its exit. There ahead lay one of the 4 control towers, colored differently compared to the other buildings, and in front of that was...
We thought that you'd come. We expected that you'd come. That's right. That's exactly right. That's completely right. Perhaps that's right. Maybe that's right. Probably that's right. Isn't that right? Isn't that probably right? Because that's right. The wait was well worth it.
Before the entrance of the control tower, a lone boy stood on the cobblestone square. Dressed in dirty rags, dark brown hair left to grow for a long time until it reached great length, his crazy eyes twinkling and shining with happiness. Sharp canine teeth and a dripping tongue hung from his mouth. With both arms slouched down, he was a young boy. No matter how you looked at him, he barely seemed to have any power and looked like simply a vagrant child, but an aura of dreadfulness emanated from his body.
One more thing, just to confirm. It's him, right?
There was no need to ask whether it was. There was no doubt. It was completely convincing. As a response to Ricardo, Julius only lowered his jaw quietly. There was no possible doubt, no possible mistake, that it was the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony standing there. The worst kind of blasphemer who chewed on the names and memories of others.
Roy Alphard.
Yes, correct answer. That's our name. We're happy that you remember it. Quite happy. Pretty happy. Really happy. As we're happy because we're happy. Drinking. Gluttony would be worthwhile to eat and drink and also...
Declaring his name, Alphard laughed with terrible brutality. His eyes glared directly at Ricardo standing right next to Julius. He opened his mouth and wrung his nose, as his eyes filled with ecstasy.
This time it seems that we will even be getting a puppy, Jan. That makes us unbelievably happy. After all, our stomach might have gotten a bit troubled if it was just Julius gone. Whatever you say, it would have been completely tasteless, won't it?
It seems I've gotten rather bored by your words of insult. Henceforth, to settle this quickly, I asked my friend to accompany me this time. Though it is definitely inelegant to have more than one person.
It's nice, that way of starting. Doing that to raise self-consciousness may be nice, and it is typical of Julius Gunn. But it's rather weak. We are gourmands, so tasting that is a bit problematic. But still, we are intrigued, as Julius Gunn is one of the top class we have seen till now. Tidy and consistent.
Well, well. In addition to the big welcome we received, I am grateful for those words as well.
Well, that cannot be helped. Our honesty is something that gets overlooked. What we want you to overlook right now is this slight mismatch of characters.
Waving his hands, Alphard did not bend his posture till the end. Provocatively, Julius kept his calm, but Ricardo was unable to hide his feeling of unpleasantness. He clicked his tongue and cracked the bones of his neck.
Oh, say what you want to say, boy. It'll be a mistake just to overlook you as some brat. What you'll get for your sins won't be pretty. I'll travel across dimensions just to beat you in, because boy, I'll break you.
Oh, scary. Don't stare at us with that scary face. We apologize if you got offended that we called you a puppy, Ricardo Wilkin. But still, we still longed for you a bit, you know? Don't scare us in that rough, loud voice of yours.
Calling Ricardo by name, he shouted as Julius frowned. Seeing his eyes, Julius shook his head. Strange. Alfred's remarks were merely a madman's delusion, but the enormous sense of discomfort could not be easily wiped away. For example, when did he learn Ricardo's name?
Darn spooky brat. From where or when did you learn our names?
It wouldn't be very wise to try and investigate. It's just that. It's obvious that we would know your name. Isn't that true, Julius Khan?
No matter how much you consent, I cannot respond to you. You too. I am completely ignorant regarding you. If this is the way you will do it, I will break the flow just as much.
Look, there's that boring conclusion again. Even though we care about it quite much, it's uneasy. It's unpleasant. Hiding it in the chest, putting aside thinking about oneself for later. It's pretty virtuous as a knight, but it's pretty boring as a person.
Pulling out his knight's sword, Julius's lips silently whispered something, and immediately afterwards, 6 extremely brilliant lights surrounded Julius. They were the 6 quasi-spirits Julius was always accompanied by. This mix of swordsmanship and spiritual arts was what made Julius the finest of knights.
Neither the aroma of the feeling of inferiority, nor the rich texture of experiencing frustration, even the sweetness of a strong desire, or the rare taste of a sense of satisfaction after you've aged. You have none of them.
Ricardo, give it your everything from the beginning. Let us work together.
Yeah, leave it to me.
Shaking his arms, Alfard revealed the daggers attached on his wrists. Wielding 2 daggers was Gluttony's fighting style, but it did not seem to be enough to stop Julius's magic or prevent Ricardo's blows. As long as the battle was not an ambush, their respective victory and defeat were already in sight. Regardless, in Ricardo's eyes, Alfard did not seem an opponent that could provide a rich and challenging battle experience.
Spirit Knight, Julius Cuculius.
As per his manners, Julius gave his name ahead of the fight. However, Ricardo, who was standing next to him, had no such obligations to follow. They fixed their eyes, waiting for Gluttony to give his identity. Seeing Ricardo's line of sight, Alfard shouted,
How nice. Quite nice. Perhaps it is nice. Isn't it nice? Maybe it is nice. Possibly it is nice. Probably it is nice, because it is probably nice. Gluttonous drinking, gluttony, gourmet, bizarre eating, satiation, overeating, spiciness, blandness, deliciousness, delicacy. We will eat everything up, even a life without taste. It is also a taste that's nutritious.
El Clauzel!
The vibrance of the 6 colors drew a circle in front of Julius's eyes, and an extremely bright light emanated from the tip of his sword that aimed a stab through Alfard's center. Multiple affinities mixed, that destructive power developed into a rainbow-colored blow that could swallow up everything. Ricardo stepped on ahead with momentum that crushed the cobblestone, just behind the dazzling light, as if in an attempt to have Ricardo push Alfard aside, right into the extremely vibrant light. Against the heavy slashes and the rainbow-colored, extremely vibrant light, Alfard uncovered his fangs.
Truly, this is as magnificent as imagined. We will be enchanted.
Beneath the moon, flashes of silver sliced through wind, as sparks spilled forth from a symphony of swordplay. The first musician was a sword demon who swung a pair of blades with crisp notes. His partner welcomed him, a swordswoman whose movements flowed reminiscent the path of a gentle stream. Flashes of metal danced through the air. The clash of steel should have sounded cruel, and yet, somehow, this symphony was wistfully melancholic. The ringing of sharp, precise collisions resembled the gentle caresses of a pair of lovers. The reason for this was simple. These two swordsmen complemented each other on a level beyond perfection. The sword demon steeled his breath as he let loose a flurry of elliptical blows. Those precise arcs were practically a form of art, their clean movements the ideal standard for all aspiring swordsmen. His sheer skill was so overwhelming that anyone who was worthy of calling themselves a knight would have been so captivated that their battle would be guaranteed a loss. And yet he merely, almost casually, unleashed flurry after flurry. One single light blow would have been more than fatal in this reign of unending death. However, meeting this peerless hurricane was a longsword whose owner was truly extraordinary. Moreover, that longsword had an odd quality. The length of the blade, as tall as its owner, was too unwieldy to make a proper weapon, and yet the slender swordswoman swung the huge blade with ease, as if it were weightless. Although the longsword's owner was draped from head to toe in a black cloak, impeding on her vision, the tip of her sword flowed as if dancing through water. Whether it be in terms of speed or polish, the twin blades greatly outstripped the longsword. Even so, each and every one of the sword demon's piercing attacks were, without fail, absorbed and deflected. Between the sparks and sharp clangs, with an almost pitying hiss toward the sword demon, the swordswoman leapt backward. A beat too slow to react to the unexpected move, just as he was about to push forward, the gleam of a blade pierced his forehead. Flashing before him was a blow that he could not allow to make contact. This was a specialized killing blow that flashed faster than the blink of an eye, which disguised the approaching blade. If not for his extensive experience in dueling her, he would have been unable to see through the imminent death he had nearly been dealt, and the gleam would have passed through his brain and killed him. The skin between his brows burned at the close call. In an instant, the sword demon cast off his misgivings and began to pursue the woman who had frozen in her stinging pose. Before he had even gathered himself enough to act, the woman had driven her toes into his flesh. Her slender feet pierced between his well-exercised abdominal muscles and jolted his organs. The weight of her kick bent his body double, as a silver flash drew an arc, which hung over his head. The glittering sword flew straight as true, as if meaning to cut down the moon. Having reached the peak of its flight, the sword began to glide back to earth, and slicing straight through the atmosphere, meaning to bisect the sword demon. The power behind that attack was incomparable to any of the previous ones. Both the deadliness of the blade itself and its owner's skills were more than capable of slicing through any human body. Approaching in the briefest of flashes was the certain death.
Stop looking down on me.
Still bent double, he immediately swung both his arms upward, staggering as they met the crushing force overhead. The sword demon's own blades overlapped as they caught the weapon bearing down on him, as his jaws clenched from its sheer power. Unable to fend it off entirely, his arms began to fall, and shallowly, the blade pierced his forehead. Blood spurted forth, splattering his field of vision red. However, he had not fallen to his knees, nor had his own swords been broken. The arms holding the sword back strained upward, pushing the fallen sword back again. Sweeping the heavy blade aside, the residual aftershocks shook the form of the swordswoman before him. Taking advantage of the moment, he kicked forward. The force that should have slammed back into the ground was instead redirected into the woman's airborne form. The combination of the force from the falling blade and the kick slammed the woman's body into the distance. The aging sword demon lunged into the slender body that had nowhere left to flee. An opening. Against the swordswoman who had flown into the air, with no escape route, the sword demon lowered his shoulder and unleashed an attack. Catching up to her fleeing form, the attack came simultaneously from top and bottom. As one, the two blades drew an arc, tearing toward her slender form with the bite of a wild beast. In midair, with her back turned toward him, she could make no counterattack. Even so, the clarity of the attack found itself shaken. The hood that had covered the swordswoman's head, unable to withstand the tug of gravity as she flipped her body, swished back, revealing what had once been hidden. Cascading down was long hair the color of a beautiful, raging flame. At the time of its entry into her field of vision, the swordsman's attack carried a flaw which existed for briefer than a single instant. An incredibly subtle, slight deviation from perfection was this mistake. Even so, no one else would be able to parry this attack. However, considering the sword demon's current opponent, this mistake was fatal. To an existence which had once won the favor of the sword god, that turbid blade could not reach at all. At the scene in front of him, the sword demon's throat was frozen by a shudder. That certain blow had been interrupted midway. It had not been anything special. The woman had merely drawn her sword in midair, and wedged it between the swords that came from above and below, as easy as sliding a brace between a pair of fangs. The blade and the pommel of her longsword completely caught the advance of the two swords right in their tracks. What had the sword demon shudder was that the bite of steel on steel had rung out only once. Catching the two blades with only one crisp sound meant that she had calculated the timing of them both colliding with her own weapon down to the millisecond. What was truly horrifying was the necessary clarity of vision, skill, and sheer nerve to even attempt such an act. The stunt, so far beyond what common sense dictated was possible, drew a sigh of admiration from the sword demon's throat. At that moment, the leg of the woman who was still caught between the swords flew in a wide arc, kicking away the sword demon's hands, which still rested where his attack had stalled. The impact jolted his weapons from the hands which wielded them, and, in that moment, he found himself completely defenseless. Then, with a flash of steel, the longsword made a cross. The combination of the speed at which the blade approached and the range from which it had been loosed could not have been shorter. Even with little time and distance, the empty-handed swordsman had no way to block. The longsword pierced his thin skin and continued on to drive into his organs and sever his spine, driving through his left side in one single motion and splitting his body into halves. Coughing up blood and internal organs, the body already shackled by old age breaking with the blow. That was the unavoidable fate that awaited him. That was the end that could not be evaded, and the conclusion of the matter. After the end of his life, having lost everything, he could not even cling to a chance at redemption. That kind of conclusion was simply impossible to accept. He rebelled against the bloody end that flashed through his mind. The throat of the sword demon burned with that illusory scene of the end, the vitality of his twilight years erupting forth, breaking the limits of his concentration so that even the passage of time stalled. Only he and his opponent existed in that moment, the sounds and colors of the world fading from focus. The impending blade traced an unexpected orbit to stab into his body. Slowly feeling the touch of the blade piercing through his fragile skin, as well the heat and pain of bleeding, whilst feeling as if the natural force of gravity had increased tenfold, he planted all his power into his 2 feet. Digging his heels in hard enough to shatter stone, he redirected the force of swinging his arms to the right into a reactive motion. Reversing his body with the shortest distance and best angle, turning to the side as if approaching the blade that brushed his body, a form of evasion which allowed him to roll along the blade that slid across his side. Having been thwarted in her attack, the swordswoman's follow-up attack was delayed by but a brief moment. In that time, the sword demon retreated several paces, plucking his twin swords from midair. With a sigh, he placed the palm of his hand onto his side, checking the depth of the wound. This was certainly no minor scratch. He had turned while a blade had been invading his body, after all. Spinning while being pierced, he had naturally drawn a wound on his body. Fortunately, by a hair's breadth, He had kept the blade from plunging into his organs, but the amount of blood dripping from the wound mere centimeters away from his innards was by no means a small amount. To ordinary people, this was a serious injury, although that was natural.
From the very start, I did not feel I could persist in this battle for too long.
He had already been running on a time limit. It had only grown shorter. The sword demon, Wilhelm, rolled off his shirt and violently staunched the bleeding from his waist. Exposing his healthy flesh during this emergency treatment, he was not pursued. The woman opposing him merely watched quietly, her gaze devoid of emotion. At his own anticipation of any swaying or subtle changes in those eyes, Wilhelm gave a bitter smile. Pressing on his open wound, he jolted himself awake with the pain.
Such weakness is useless. Stop dreaming. This sacred reunion, you will one day be able to indulge in as much as you want. In the heavens. I do not think I'm hallucinating, nor do I expect miracles. My wife was a woman who was reluctant to follow the way of the sword, but pushing the responsibility of wielding the sword onto others was something she never once did.
An emotionless corpse, a revived construct. Crimson hair silky and flowing, smooth skin snowy and transparent, eyes bijoux of precious gems. Closing his own, he recalled that cute face that he would never tire of. All this was before him, and all this should not have been before him.
Theresia, how lovely you are. Therefore, you cannot remain here.
Wilhelm tightened his grip on his swords, taking up a fighting stance again. At this moment, standing here, was not the husband of Theresia von Ostrea. The one who had prayed to stand here was not Wilhelm von Ostrea. Who stood here at this moment was the sword demon, Wilhelm. Facing his dead wife, Wilhelm steeled his spirit, his gaze becoming clear and clean. Even if his blood were boiling, he would not allow his anger at the sinister presence to come to a breaking point. But right now, at this moment, at this time, anything else was superfluous. His old friend, his comrade in arms, his wife, had once said to Wilhelm, "Don't allow heat to besmirch the blade. Don't allow your blood to boil. You must learn to love the coldness of steel." How about now? Was it growing hot?
No, it's frigid, like of a knife.
Under the moon, the sword demon pierced his opponent with a gaze of steel. The talented swordswoman who was his opponent also waved the tip of her longsword again, without any flaws. In an instant, their swords once again flashed again toward each other. The sounds of steel intertwined with each other as a wail, a plea, a courtship. The expectation of an end, and the hope that it would never come to an end. As if exchanging endless dialogue without a single word, the sound of swordplay played ceaselessly, echoing.
Ah, damn it! No response at all. What a joke.
Kicking off the ground, kicking off a wall, kicked off a roof, and soaring up. Flying diagonally in the air, his short blonde hair fluttering as if bathed in the wind, exposing his teeth, a picture of desperation. Time and time again, gnashing his fangs, fighting the burning sensation in his body and chest.
Bastard. What's up? Hello?
His clothes flapping, he broke into a run the instant he touched the ground again. This was a feat that only those of exceptional strength and endurance, far beyond a human level, could achieve. However, the one who flew over the city with only his own body expressed no pride in his abilities. Instead, he kept roaring into an unresponsive hand mirror. The one sprinting was Garfiel, who was howling into the magic device in his hand, the conversation mirror. The conversation mirror, which should have been able to link him to others who possessed one, remained silent. No one picked up Garfiel's call, even though, clearly, there were two groups of people capable of responding.
City Hall guys. Harass fighting guys.
The conversation mirrors were supposed to have been assigned so that everyone could stay in contact during their respective battles. In fact, they had been working perfectly fine just after he had left the City Hall. But now, when contact was actually necessary, the conversation mirror had fallen silent, a betrayal of its function. This needed to be communicated immediately.
Gotta tell them that they need to evacuate the City Hall now! Damn it!
As he said so, he leapt upward, skipping the street in front of him as he took a shortcut. Although his rough landing shattered the roof he landed on, Garfiel had no attention to spare. Compared to damage to the city, ensuring the safety of his companions against the counteroffensive was far more important. The goal of his rapid travel was the City Hall. Garfiel was rushing back to the place he had left only a few minutes ago. Leaving behind Wilhelm, who was accompanying him, he desperately called to the conversation mirror. There was no other reason. Danger was quickly approaching the City Hall that was serving as their base. Wilhelm and Garfiel had arrived at the control tower occupied by Lust, at about the same time that Reinhard began to engage with Greed. Having witnessed the distant aurora, the two warriors entered the control tower. Witch cultists, or the troublesome people they expected to, neither had appeared to intercept their path. As expected, the witch cult's forces that had undertaken the assault on the city seemed to consist only of their executives. Everything had been smooth sailing until then, and there had not been any rooms worth checking out in the control tower, which only held the functions necessary for operating the city's floodgates. So, the pair naturally headed to the top floor to prepare for a decisive battle with Lust. In their imagination, the Lust camp was expected to be the most dangerous, as far as combat power was concerned. In addition to Lust, there were two outstanding fighters, which meant that the two would have to face 3 enemies. Naturally, they were both engulfed in tension.
If possible, I would appreciate if you leave the swordswoman to me.
The captain's also told me that. Seems like there's something between ya. But my amazing self's got a bone to pick with that woman. Can't let you have her so easily.
That is my wife. Those bastards have made a mockery of her death, trampled upon her soul, and forced her to point a sword at that which she had sworn to protect. No matter what, this is impermissible.
On the way, Wilhelm had revealed his reason for wanting to fight. That was a reason that Garfiel, who should have had no basis to give up, could not help but keep his mouth shut against. And his inability to form a reply in that moment might have been just what decided the most fitting opponent of the swordswoman. Although he had said nothing, Garfiel conceded the opponent to Wilhelm. Wilhelm also indicated his understanding of this, silently bowing his head to express his gratitude. So, when he had stepped into the control tower, Garfiel felt the cold sensation of his hair sticking straight up. If Wilhelm was going to fight the female swordsman, then he would have to deal with the remaining 2 by himself. The swordswoman went without mention, and the giant accompanying her was no less powerful than she was. Although Lust was seemingly lacking in terms of combat power, Subaru had repeatedly emphasized that what was fearsome about the Sin Archbishop was not her strength in battle, but her nature. Silent tension and pervasive fighting spirit. As his sense of smell caught an increasingly strong scent of blood, Garfiel equipped the silver shields which had been strapped to his legs, and rushed into the room by kicking the door open. And there, he saw it.
Why the hell would I just be obediently waiting here? Fool!
Words scrawled in blood, occupying an entire wall of the room. When he realized what they meant, Garfiel's head seethed. Fleeing from a battle as if it were a matter of course, a type of personality which could straightforwardly say that there was no obligation to wait.
Neglectful. Those bastards are exactly the type to pull that kind of trick.
Wilhelm lowered his voice and retrieved the conversation mirror from his sleeves. The reason for trying to get in touch with the City Hall so immediately was because Wilhelm had had that idea first.
If our forces are sent out to raid, then our base's combat power will naturally diminish. These guys do not have any shame in exploiting this gap.
Before the pale-faced Garfiel, Wilhelm grimaced at the unresponsive conversation mirror. At the same time, along the roof of the control tower, emerged a deep, oppressive hostility. A feeling that his back was being stroked by a blade was what tipped Garfiel off about the existence of the enemy. Wilhelm had also felt the hostile presence.
Garfield, Otto, I shall entrust City Hall to you.
If it comes down to it, my amazing self can get there faster.
They exchanged ideas in a flash. The enemy was as a razor-sharp, clandestine blade. Exposing their backs as they tried to flee would only result in the both of them being cut down from behind. Between them, one of them needed to stay, and one of them needed to return to the City Hall.
Please try and continue to establish contact. My master, I entrust her to you.
Goes without saying. Libre's voice rouses soldiers' blood, as they say.
Garfiel caught the thrown conversation mirror and sped out of the control tower. Like so, he flew across the city, crossed the waterway, and continued to call into the mirror that offered no response. Wilhelm's battle was also probably starting.
Damn it! All that for nothing?
If Lust launched a surprise attack on the City Hall, there would be very little forces capable of greeting her. Anastasia and Felix had no combat power, and Krush had collapsed from her injuries. Although several members of the Iron Fangs stood on guard, their combat power was not comparable to Mimi's. The instant that he thought of Mimi, Garfiel's chest grew sore. The girl who, even now, hovered just above the abyss of death, who he had rescued, saved, protected, keeping her alive, saving her, that clearly should have been his duty. That duty had been conceded to another due to sentiment, and his chance at vengeance grew further by the second. However, even the work that was taken as an alternative could not be completed satisfactorily. What was he doing? Looking as he did, what was he doing? To Mimi, Subaru, his sister, Ram, or anyone, he could not lift his head to face them.
My amazing self can't do anything?
The unresponsive conversation mirror reflected such an unpromising face. In the moment that he cursed himself. As he smashed the roof whilst leaping, he was a beat too slow in reacting to the shadow flying in from that side. That form, far more massive than his own, met him with a horizontal impact. The reason why he could not even issue a cry of pain was because his throat had been hooked and squeezed shut under an elbow. Blood and oxygen were unable to circulate through his brain. Maintaining his consciousness grew steadily more difficult. Pulling him back into gradual consciousness was the force of the impact over his whole body. The body that had greeted his obliquely in midair slammed Garfiel into a nearby building. Breaking the wall with his entire body, Garfiel tossed up a cloud of dust. The dull pain and broken bones drew a groan from Garfiel, as he felt himself being liberated from the restraint. Using his body's elasticity, Garfiel slammed the ground as hard as he could, pulling himself upright again. He found himself in a structure devoid of lighting. The smog that filled the room had become a white smoke under the moonlight, and, before his own blood-coughing figure, he could detect another presence. That was undoubtedly the culprit who had sniped him and landed them in here.
You bastard! You really know how to...
The instant he took a battle stance, a fist slammed into his stomach. Garfiel's entire abdominal area took the force of his opponent's huge fists, and his body flew upward. Then he was smashed by a fist that had been swung from above, and the already decrepit floor broke beneath them, and he fell another level. The sole of a foot slammed into his downward falling body. The damage caused by both the momentum and the mass caused him to spit blood, and his body, stomped on once again, crashed fiercely and directly through to the entrance to the building, where it was smashed into the street. From this striking impact, Garfiel continued to cough powerfully, climbing to his feet. At the same time, He applied simple healing magic to himself, knitting his broken bones as he raised his head. The one who chased him from the top of the building to this place was a hulking figure, whose head could only be seen if Garfiel craned his head. Although covered head to toe in black robes, even that could not disguise the thickness of his arms and legs. Rather than saying he was muscular, it would be no exaggeration to say that he wore an armor of muscle. To Garfiel, this would be the third time facing that enemy. That name was already known as well.
Kurgan, the Eight Arms.
He was one of the Wallachia Empire's sword-swinging heroes. Although he was said to have died in battle while defending an imperial city decades ago, for him to be here right now, could he have suffered the same humiliation and death that Wilhelm's wife had? When Garfiel spoke that name, the giant, Kurgan, extended his arms. At that moment, the clasp of his robes gave way, revealing his figure. That is to say, the hero Kurgan revealed his majesty in close-range battle. As expected, his strong body was covered by a thick armor of muscle, a powerful physique which could rival the giant's own, and above his neck, a face which could be described as demonic, filled with the domineering expression of a god of war. And what made this god of war a god of war were the 8 arms which enabled those extraordinary fighting techniques. In addition to the 2 arms that usually grew from the shoulders, 2 more arms sprouted from the same place. Moving one's gaze down his body revealed 2 more arms extending from his flank just beneath his shoulders, and the rest stretched their palms forward from behind. That was in accordance with Kurgan's moniker as the 8 Arms. Someone capable of sapping his enemy's will to fight with just his natural body. Facing Garfiel, who had swallowed a deep breath, Kurgan kept his silence as he drew his weapon. Strapped to his thick legs, coincidentally mounted in the same style as Garfiel's shield, were a pair of thick, long, distorted blades, the demon cleavers that this god of war swung. This god of war drew 2 other ghost cleavers from his back, for a total of 4. Although the remaining 4 arms were still unarmed, Garfiel was nonetheless completely overwhelmed by his appearance. He had no leisure to underestimate the enemy in the slightest. His body trembled. In front of this real hero, Garfiel's body trembled from his core. Garfiel stared at the hero, the legendary figure, the great man who had left a mark in history. To not know the name of Kurgan, the 8 Arms, was impossible for him. Garfiel indeed took great interest in the myriad legends coming from every which way, and today he stood in front of his very own eyes as an enemy. This was a nightmare, an ongoing nightmare that had begun yesterday. What else could it be, malicious as it was? Garfiel's breath quickened as he reached towards his legs. Mounted there, in the same way as Kurgan's demon cleavers, were silver shields. Unaware of how many times his fingers slipped, finally, the straps came undone. Placing his shields on his arms as if to cover his fists, he knocked them together for confirmation, creating a sharp note which echoed in the night sky. His equipment was ready, and his injuries had healed enough to not be debilitating. However, his mind was still, at the moment, frazzled.
It's no time to say stupid shit.
Clenching his fangs, Garfiel hit himself in the face. Shaking his head from the dizzying pain and shock, he turned his gaze forward again. Assuming his stance again, he bared his fangs at the god of war before him.
If I'm just standing here, the hell's my amazing self for? Whether it's the captain, or the other guys too, they're all fighting. Obviously, all my amazing self's good for is fighting. So the fuck am I stalling here for?
To Garfiel, who screamed to pump himself with enthusiasm, Kurgan remained impassive. The silent god of war that Garfiel was facing would only watch him quietly. With a pout, he broke the street's pavement, then rushed forward with a single step. Through the soles of his shoes, he absorbed the power of the earth, allowing his divine protection of earth spirits to redirect all that energy into his body for a blow. His fist was truly infused with the power to shatter a stone building. His silver shield reinforced the fist's blow, one strong enough to break even a hero. His arm, having been loosened, flew straight and true towards Kurgan's sternum.
How's this?
Using the full force of his body, Garfiel's attack was blocked by Kurgan's Demon Cleaver. The Demon Cleaver, blocking the direct attack to Kurgan's abdomen, withstood the power of Garfiel's blow. He did not evade, nor did he flinch. With only a hard block, a full-bodied attack was dispelled. The hero, the 8 Arms, had used only a single arm. Garfiel's stiff expression ushered in a punch from behind the shoulder. The body that turned backwards was caught by the arm that protruded from a side, and, unable to escape, he could only take a wild beating. His cheekbones were broken in an instant, and his fundus was crushed. The field of view of his right eye was stained vivid red. A razor fang shattered and was blown away. His torso still caught in a grab, he was slammed to the ground, kicked down the street by a powerful leg, and rolled into the nearby waterway. Everything went in a flash, and he stared at the moon that floated so high above him. The moon seemed to laugh at him. Afterward, Garfield's body sank into the waterway. The surface of the water was slowly dyed crimson.
Arc 5, Chapter 52, The Stars and the Sin Archbishops. The collapse was pushing in, that shower of fresh blood, each drop and every drop, like a malevolent hand grasping gallant destruction, trampled over the city. Wherever the droplets touched, more so than striking a sheet of paper with the edge of a blade, it unresistingly lost its cohesion. The destructive propagation demolished buildings, and the aftermath, in turn, spread further collapse around it. Fully aware that he was being unreasonable, yet wringing out breath from his lungs, Subaru continued powering through his sprint. Jogging alongside him was Emilia, her gleaming silver hair fluttering through the air, and her mouth tightly shut, similarly mid-stride. However, the scenic water city's specialty canals stretched out from them in all directions. Simply put, finding a straight path to properly escape on was proving difficult. In front of the dashing pair spread waterways, while destruction from the rear threatened to swallow them both.
Watch out!
We're sailing close to the wind, but... Subaru! Grab on!
As their escape route cutting off caused Subaru to raise his voice, Emilia instantly conceived of a different notion. He grabbed onto her outstretched arm without hesitation, and in that same moment, a chill came over the surrounding air. It was the effect of both magic born of the spirit's borrowed strength and the power of Emilia herself, acting together.
Please, everyone!
Once Emilia commanded them so, from each luminous point blue light surged downwards. In the next instant, the ground beneath was instantly soaked with white, and in a blink of the eye, a whole world of frost had spread. The streets froze over, and the soles of Subaru's shoes slipped in quite the acrobatic spectacle, begetting a scream from him. However, despite his slumped posture, his body was pulled forth.
Oh! Emilia is amazing! So clever!
Control is difficult, so don't let go of my hand.
Subaru looked up, his right hand still linked with Emilia's own. Tightly grasped by the half-elf's raised left fist was an icicle directed ahead. Freezing the ground and thrusting from it an icicle, her borrowing of the propulsion force from her magic had thus hastened their escape. Even more surprising was the course of ice formed by the spirits in the air. On the edge of the waterway in front of them, something like a ski jump had been formed, and the Subaru and Emilia pair, gliding with their built-up momentum, had sailed over the channel. On the other side of the waterway, another course of ice had been created. While she was touching down and skating over it, Subaru honestly praised Emilia's skill.
Nice, Emilia-tan! I fell for you all over again!
But I can't think of a way to stop. What should we do?
Emilia had already released the icicle, but the leftover momentum was still plenty to cause unavoidably high damage once they hit an obstacle. Using only her ice magic, conveniently making something like a cushion for the two to absorb the heavy impact was not a possibility. In the meantime, the pair was drawing closer and closer to a wall. Moments before impact, feeling Emilia's hand tightly squeezing his, Subaru made a snap judgment.
Emilia-tan! Install Kyokusen!
Kyokusen?
A gently bending kind of wall! In a circle!
Hearing Subaru's desperate call, Emilia with her magic meekly obeyed. Right in front of their sliding forms, a gentle curve formed, and following along it, while turning widely, those two avoided impact.
Just like that! Don't let the curves cut off! Twirl! Twirl!
Twirl! Twirl!
Just so, turning widely like that, as to not cut off at a wall, more curves of ice formed. Viewed from above, an ice wall shaped like a mosquito repellent coil was created, and the two bodies reaching the midpoint just barely lost enough speed to safely come to a stop.
After wasting a bunch of Emilia-tan's magic, we did it somehow.
More importantly, the attack from earlier.
As the stopped Subaru let out a sigh, Emilia whacked her ice formation with her hand and shattered it. Watching the crushed ice returning to mana particles, and turning to see the traces of destruction they had fled from, a shiver ran up Subaru's spine. Centered around the tower from which Regulus's attack had originated, the scenery of the city had changed. Especially near the center, where the impacts of blood had been strongly felt, the destruction was severe. Further outwards in the perimeter of destruction, deviations in its traces formed. But even then, few buildings still held their original shape. In other words, it was an attack with an abnormally high area of effect. The attack had crossed the waterway and reached over in Subaru's direction. That it had barely failed to reach Subaru was the result of chance and a desperate escape. Not.
Reinhard!
On the building Regulus had stood up to this moment, there was now no one. Instead, in its vicinity, thick smoke was rising, and the sound of tremendous destruction was echoing. Regulus had torn up the carcass of the water dragon, smirking while it sprayed blood. In that moment, he could already see two small figures desperately trying to escape down an alley. How puny, how very petty, how truly trivial. Laughing mockingly as the scattered blood trampled on the city, he eagerly awaited the moment that destruction would catch up to the fleeing duo. A prostitute and a rapist. For them, death in a hail of blood was fitting.
Scatter! Scatter away! You heinous fiends who trampled on my heart!
My apologies, but I cannot let you do that.
Immediately after declaring his rage and victory with those words, he was startled by a voice speaking close to his ear. As he turned around, a head of red hair, with the appearance of flames fanned by the wind, came into view.
How foolish you look, getting in the way of someone's love with such zeal!
If your method was proper and respectful of rights, if once rejected you promised to pull away cleanly, then I would not even hesitate to cheer for you.
At Regulus's infuriated voice, Reinhard responded with a laugh and a tease. While that ever so composed posture was indeed hateful, what now took hold of Regulus's feelings was an inexplicable suspicion. Then, leaping in a single burst, came Reinhard's leg. Certainly, that right leg, on its shin it had suffered a serious injury. Though not entirely torn off, to say it was held to the ankle with a mere strip of leather was no exaggeration. Far from battle-worthy, it was in no state to bear walking on. That he had left that state meant...
That is so dumb. It's not just swordsmanship. Is healing magic your specialty too? With all those talents of yours better than others, just how much did you trample over their hearts on the way here? Shattering the hearts of others without even trying. Does that feel good? Huh?
Among your misconceptions, in one respect, I will definitely correct you.
Reinhard twisted, the wind shrieking as it shrouded his body. His released spinning kick blew through the air, landing directly on the water dragon's body, wielded by Regulus. That corpse, which had already become a simple mass of meat, now shattered.
What?
I cannot use any kind of magic, let alone healing magic. It was simply the microspirits in the air that came to my aid, hastily healing the wounds on my foot.
As the force from his leg demolished the body, with a twist of his ankle he rescued it from Regulus's grasp. Through that very skillful footwork, the water dragon's remains were not excessively ill-treated, and were then gently tossed onto the roof of a partially wrecked building. Then...
Perfect. Next on the checklist, Operation H will commence.
At the same moment he begrudged Reinhard's hypocritical act, his sword's pommel knocked him upside the head. Smacked away, Regulus's body rolled down the slope of the roof. Askew over the ground and headed straight downwards, in his ear again was...
I shall put it to the test.
Huh?
Leaping at the same angle with a bullet's speed, Reinhard drew close, grasping Regulus's leg as he inverted mid-fall, and with a shake his form was swallowed up by Reinhard's actions. Now Reinhard, while carrying Regulus, leapt in the direction of the fleeing Subaru with an awesome storm, accelerating quickly enough to tear off the leg of any ordinary person.
Just what the?
Nothing particularly special.
Flaming so, Reinhard lifted Regulus's body as he stopped. With the attitude of a child grasping a doll's leg and playing roughly, while Regulus's temper at that treatment was exploding, he came to understand the finer details of Reinhard's plan. Wielding Regulus's body, Reinhard flung him into the falling droplets of blood. Even demolishing buildings formed from stone, that shower of blood imbued with force by Regulus. If it had such power, then that attack made by Regulus's ability may even be effective against whatever protection he had on his own body. If that had been the idea, it proved a foolish one.
If it's my own strike, then it must work on me? I don't know just how naturally gifted you were born, but don't viciously look down on others so much, I say. There's no way it'd be done in with some stupid method like that!
This too was ineffective.
Those droplets of blood, touching Regulus's body, became simple droplets on the spot and splashed off his form. Obviously, the priority was different. At that same moment, Reinhard suddenly released his grip on Regulus's leg. He was an intelligent fellow. If he had let the droplets reach him as such, his palm would have turned into a mess which could not possibly grasp a sword again. The force of the swing disappeared, landing there onto the street. Regulus once again faced Reinhard. The latter narrowed his eyes in warning.
Somehow, it no longer seems possible to touch him again.
It seems you have a keen nose. Do you want to get hurt again like you did a while ago?
From now on, I will be wary of your breath and vision both. If there are any other precautions to take, I would be glad to hear them.
Get out of my sight! Right now!
Stepping forth with both hands raised, Regulus ran at Reinhard. With unbelievable speed, Reinhard turned in a broad arc to dodge, giving him a wide berth. Using the pommel of the dragon sword, he rained blows down on Regulus from a distance.
You just love to run, no matter where you go!
Being unable to solve the problem with sword strikes. How impotent. Truly, I am ashamed of myself.
You haven't even drawn that sword of yours yet!
Facing Reinhard as he weaved back and forth, Regulus made a relatively unseen motion of reaching out his hand. However, such a flippant attack could never reach a hero like Reinhard. Not only that, Reinhard's bright blue eyes were still wary of the heavily breathing Regulus's petty tricks. Both were unable to land a decisive strike, being stuck in a deadlock.
Huh?
But then, a spear suddenly flew straight forward. Aiming at Regulus, who faced the straight-backed Reinhard, an icicle speared through the ground at his feet. However, the ice under his feet, after he had taken a single step, shattered before the image could even become concrete. Flippantly, Regulus cast his gaze about, settling on the silver-haired maiden who stood at the other end of the canal, hand outstretched. Undoubtedly, the ice magic had been one of her little tricks. Disgusting was this visceral feeling of tumbling and boiling.
Each and every one of you! What can't you understand already? The fact that we're different! What have we from the moment of our birth is different! You all can't reach or compete with my completed self! Accept that you're lackluster! Be satisfied with it, and die!
No matter what, enough of these relentless opposing evildoers. Such an absolute gap could not be reduced. Why was this so hard to grasp?
Operation A has also failed. What next?
Regulus stomped his feet, splitting the alleyway. No space left in his ears to listen to Reinhard's mumbling.
No good. As expected, that attack was ineffective.
It wasn't. Which is to say, the possibility of his feet being Achilles' heel was also gone.
Emilia, as per his instructions, had attacked the soles of Regulus's feet. However, they had rent the ice without any trace of injury.
Operation H failed as well. Apologies, my capabilities are lacking.
In an instant, Reinhard had also used the divine protection of telepathy to send a psychic message, and Subaru no longer found himself thrown off balance by these superhuman idiosyncrasies. Closely examining the injury on his right foot revealed that it had stopped bleeding. But even if it had been entirely shredded, this would not have been the least bit surprising. Besides, the implications of a shredded foot, Subaru had already experienced.
If his invincibility is a barrier, it may not extend to where his feet come in contact with the ground. So I came up with Operation A.
The grounded parts of him had to have disabled the power, or he would just sink into the ground. Subaru had thought this might be the case, but that turned out to have been wrong. According to Reinhard's report of Operation H, the idea that Regulus would have to disable his invincibility to launch his invincible attacks was also off. In that case, Operation S was also a no-go. It seemed that reality denied the notion that there would be a weakness in his invincibility.
Is there anything else? An invisible enemy's weakness. Weakness!
Covering his mouth, Subaru furiously ordered his mind to spin. Before encountering and even after having met Regulus, what he had often been troubled by was the means of defeating someone with an ultimate shield, and whatever other ways there may be. Flying through Subaru's mind were answers from a variety of subcultures, as though he had almost figured it out, but there was no clean-cut answer.
Is the way I'm thinking about this off? Is the direction wrong?
What was needed was perhaps not a way to break through the invincibility. Rather, something more fundamental. Regulus's authority. What was its nature?
Subaru, what else is there? What should I do?
Emilia questioned Subaru, but had fallen deep into thought. Before them, across a large canal, the fierce battle between Reinhard and Regulus continued, but she was unable to offer any help, which left her feeling discomfited. Whether Emilia or Reinhard, both trusted in Subaru, both had expectations of Subaru. And not just the two of them, the allies stationed elsewhere, and the citizens of Prestella he had called with his broadcast, all shared those sentiments. Thinking. Although those memories were distasteful, Subaru began to think back to everything since his first encounter with Regulus. Up until this instant, his actions and words, the attacks and schemes he had tried to pull. There should have been something. There should have been some reason. Not just Regulus was fine, including the other Sin Archbishops. There should have been something. They were all scum. That much was already clear. It wasn't that...
The names of... the stars.
Subaru?
Suddenly, Subaru realized it. Before, he had thought the same thing, and now he cast aside the joke to think of it seriously. Now that things have reached this point, he began to consider an abandoned idea anew. Regulus, Capella, Alfred, Sirius, Betelgeuse, these star-related names gathered in one place. Could he really treat them so casually as a coincidence? In retrospect, the Water Plumage Pavilion, the customs of Karagi, and Hoshin of the Wilderness. In this world, so many places had been touched by the influence of Subaru's original world, that he could not simply treat it as a joke. Why had he only realized just now that the witch cult did not originate from here? Betelgeuse was Betelgeuse, the hand of Orion, unseen hand. Regulus was Leo, Little King, and there was yet another name. This Little King was truly a title commensurate with him.
Emilia, I have something to ask you.
Subaru spoke quietly, and Emilia opened her eyes to nod. Subaru could feel the attention radiating from her snow-white face, and closed one eye.
That man grabbed you by the neck once, right? It's about that time. Regulus's hand. Was it warm? Or was it cold?
Huh?
At Subaru's inquiry, Emilia widened her eyes. And so, she touched a hand to her slender neck with a tap and replied,
No. Thinking back on it, I couldn't feel anything. Neither heat nor cold. There was no temperature.
Hearing Emilia's response, Subaru held his breath. From when he had been cast into the canal, his undisturbed breathing and unsoaked body, the ineffectiveness of attacking the soles of his feet, the ineffectiveness of the cancellation of his own attacks, impeccable in both offense and defense. If this was no simple, mere invincibility...
Reinhard!
He called across the canal, the name of the hero doing battle against the evil. In relentless battle, Reinhard determinedly looked towards Subaru. In order for him to hear, Subaru raised his voice high.
That man! Check if his heart's beating!
Subaru's loud words had Emilia, had Reinhard widening their eyes. So Regulus, Regulus. Otto also left the city hall for fulfilling the duty imposed on him after he confirmed the simultaneous raids on the 4 control places had been carried out, and after each of the parties had departed to conduct them.
I don't think it's strange to think he should be stopped, but it's also true that right now, we gotta reconfirm where the Book of Wisdom that the witch cult had requested is. Pitiful, isn't he, that Otto-kun?
Was what Anastasia said at Otto's departure. It seemed to be true that Anastasia wanted Otto to remain in the city hall as well. It was the place where Subaru and the other camps had already clashed with the Sin Archbishop. Though the city hall was expected to function as the headquarters, there were not many brains that could scout for information from several different places at the moment. However, leaving the Book of Wisdom in the hands of others was not something that could be done either. You could establish a relationship of cooperation with the opposing Sin Archbishop, but once out of that situation, they would return to being an enemy. Upon that happening, the effectiveness of the Book of Wisdom being watched over by others was something that should be avoided. Truthfully, it was about the Book of Wisdom being completely away from the situation in which it would be negotiated over, but Subaru and Garfiel were fine with that. Otto wanted to sigh as he felt his own personality was at fault here.
I wonder, when did I become someone who ran around for others like this?
Hitting his gray hair with his hand, Otto worried over the question that had come to his mind several times in the past year. The position he stood in was unexpected. His relationship with people was unexpected. His current emotions were unexpected. What would his family think when they got to know that he was doing all this?
If I'm fine and successful, I guess I'll try writing a letter.
If Subaru were here, he would definitely point out a death flag saying something strange as Otto stepped onto the city's 3rd street. The Sin Archbishops should be concentrated in the control towers, and considering that, they should not be in the city. They should not be. Grabbing his chest tightly, Otto felt his heartbeat quicken. Witch cult, Sin Archbishop, witch cultists. Otto had bad memories of them. A year ago, Otto recalled his first encounter with Subaru. He could not forget how scared he was of the Sin Archbishop back then. The eyes of a madman who would not think twice before taking away one's life. That madman, that figure of fanatics, who would dedicate their blood and flesh by his own will. When he truly hoped for help, only the silence and loneliness had dominated. He had never been as scared at any other time. He had never felt so empty in any other moment. Comparing the fear of then to fighting Garfiel, facing the Bowl Hunter, encountering herds of witch beasts, that was nothing. The encounter with the witch cult dropped an immensely dark shadow on Otto's heart. Even though he knew how horrible that thing was, it was not something that could be erased so easily.
All of them. Miss Emilia, who, due to her similarities with the Witch of Envy, can never escape prejudice. Subaru, who was fated to become her knight and fight for her, aimed right for the devils of the witch cult. Beatrice, who fought alongside Subaru, and spent all the strength she had in that small body. Garfiel, who put his everything into his fists in order to protect his family. Rom, with sweetness that can never be ignored, though with a sharp tongue. Frederica, who lived in negative feelings for her brother but still had a sense of responsibility she couldn't ignore. Petra, who always acted with a smiling face while everyone treated her like a child. I love everyone. I didn't intend to stay in this place for so long, but it was so comfortable. Even though I knew to stay away from scary things, I was unable to avoid them. In order to save this place, I would like to stand by their side and support them. Even in my fear, I want to help them where their hands cannot reach. That's why, somehow, I must fulfill my role.
Saying this, he stepped onto 3rd Street. There stood a small figure in front of him. Beyond the stone bridge on the waterway, there was a square, and that was where the shadow was. Besides that shadow, several more figures could be seen. But right now, Otto's eyes were fixed on only one small phantom. Sound disappeared. Everything went terribly quiet, and nothing could be heard. A situation where living beings sucked in their breath and held it, trying desperately to conceal their existence. Otto Suin knew this situation well. Subsequently, the figure in front of his eyes gently clapped its hands and, as it disheveled its long hair, raised its face. But still, his heartbeats were surprisingly calm.
Welcome, Oni-san. Welcome to the Sin Archbishop of the Witch Cult, representing Gluttony. Leibet Katos' dinner banquet.
Opening his mouth, full of fangs, the Sin Archbishop, who should not have been there, laughed gruesomely.
Arc 5, Chapter 53, A City of Strife.
Check if his heart's beating!
Intuition was the instinct that had aroused Subaru's awareness. He was not absolutely convinced, nor did he have a basis for thinking so. All he could imagine was that that thought had not been without meaning. The Sin Archbishops, the name of the stars, Kororagi, which bore influences from his original world, and those other than Subaru who found themselves summoned here. The world still bore marks of their claws. If the witch cult were also engraved with this etching, then the names of the stars Subaru had thought of did not necessarily have only a passing relationship with them. If Regulus Corneus's power could not be treated as a straightforward invincibility, then he would need to think outside the box. And thus, an idea emerged in his heart. Hoping that there would be no connection, Subaru had already said a sort of prayer asking thus. And, in the next moment, a noxious sense of oppression came, casting an illusion that had Subaru feeling as if the sun had been blotted out. The air hung thick with pollution. He would be hard-pressed to find words with which to express this discomfort, this disgust, the disgust of the peeling of a scab, the discomfort of a stench exhaled to the face, the aversion of a sticky tongue over bare skin. The origin of this turbid air was the evil which had turned his head to look back. The instant that he met its gaze, Subaru's body began to tremble involuntarily. Emotionless and empty, those eyes, like a curse, plunged deep into his soul. As if pierced by a rusted needle, even his lungs and heart were frozen by terror. However, even as Subaru found himself immobile, overcome by such feelings,
Do not look anywhere unnecessary. Your opponent should be me.
Turning to regard this Subaru meant turning his back to the Sword Saint. Raising his hands high, Reinhard has clasped in his hands what can only be described as broken signposts and scrap metal. Such materials were only ever destined to be waste, but in Reinhard's hands, they were no inferior to a treasured blade. A long blade slanted through the air struck the back of Regulus' suit. The bursting shockwave expanded in midair, leaving a sorrowful wail from the assailed atmosphere in its wake, raising vortexes in the large canals where thin sheets of ice floated. This was the aftermath of that sword's strike. Had the force of evil had been shattered to pieces, it would have come as no surprise. However, before he could take a single step...
Don't get me wrong, Sword Saint. I've been entertaining you because my heart is obliging and considerate. But even my gracious self has limits.
Huh?
Lightly, Regulus patted the place where he had only been struck by the sword and tilted his head. Reinhard, alerted by this motion, tossed aside the scraps in his hand and made to leap backward at a wide angle. Just as he prepared to jump, his feet froze in place. Reinhard's superhuman intuition. It informed him of dire imminent threats to his self, and preemptively detecting incoming attacks. His keen instincts told him that he could not dodge to the rear. He immediately straightened and began to search for alternative routes.
The air there. It has already been touched by me.
Due to the sharpening of his senses locking him to place, at that moment, Reinhard had been left unprepared. His opponent had him trapped in an invisible yet present envelope. Reinhard's judgment told him to slip by the force of evil's side, but in order to do so, he would be forced to make a defensive strike. The blow that he dealt had enough force to shear through stone. The hilt of the dragon sword pierced into Regulus' chest, but the force of evil grasped it easily.
Futile effort. Thanks for your trouble. Just pray that you won't be hurt too badly.
Just as Subaru said, your heart doesn't seem to be beating.
Regulus' relaxed smile hardened as he glanced down at his chest. The hilt that was buried in it, and the Reinhard who was straining his sharp senses, he would not have missed any movement of life, no matter how subtle. Having taken that blow, Regulus leapt high in the air, agitated. Directly, as if reproducing the scene from earlier. Reinhard blocked the kick with the sheath of the dragon sword. His body was sent flying from the impact. However, what unfolded next was different.
Reinhard!
As declared, the air behind Reinhard has been filled with countless traps of breath set by Regulus. shot into them in his unguarded state, the results were not difficult to imagine. His white clothes stained with blood, Reinhard's entire body was torn. He leapt up, but how much that would mitigate his wounds was uncertain. Buried in rubble again, Reinhard amplified the collapse of the city, making it impossible to estimate his condition. But what could be determined for certain was Reinhard's answer.
Not bad, Reinhard!
Subaru!
It's okay. Reinhard, he should be fine. So worry about him later.
I understand. What do you need me to do?
He had thought that Emilia would be concerned foremost with Reinhard's safety, and was taken aback by her response. The Emilia looking at Subaru was attentive, and fully understood where she needed to stand on this battlefield. There was both a strong reliance on Reinhard, and perhaps a trust in Subaru.
Reinhard too. He went through all that hassle because he trusted you. What have you realized about Regulus? Tell me.
Heavy trust. Heavy expectations. The reality of that belief was too heavy, enough to stir up his fighting spirit. He would certainly need to give Reinhard proper gratitude as well. Later, he would definitely go and help retrieve his remains.
The two of you, always rambling on, but acting in simplicity in your desperation. Wouldn't that be easier? Your despicable and evil behavior has angered me, so it follows that you should be punished, doesn't it? Yes, isn't that right? Impoliteness, infidelity, no matter which, are rebellious acts worthy of 10,000 executions.
Having kicked Reinhard away, Regulus sneered at the inconvenience. Across the canal, a spirit of evil began to swell forth, and in truth, Subaru almost could not bear to bring himself to face it. However, running away now would be meaningless. Natsuki Subaru would be unable to repay Emilia and Reinhard von Astrea.
A pure heroine, yet unseen of this century. Suspecting her of infidelity makes you a bastard, idiot! Isn't it uncouth to list all the reasons we should be afraid here? Try in the slightest to redirect that empty mind of yours.
Hearing the sudden strength of his speech, Regulus widened his eyes. Subaru knocked his own head, as if boasting.
Just how much of a lovely, smooth life have you had until now? I don't know, nor do I want to know. But, have you noticed yet that you are right now is in checkmate?
Checked? You're so vague that I can't even laugh. What are you trying to say? Know that you're incapable of explaining yourself in comprehensible language is also a possibility. There's no need to force yourself to say irrelevant things. Isn't that right?
Oh, don't say that. After all, you have the right to listen. Your favorite, right?
My right?
Regulus frowned, and Subaru, with a light ridiculing smile, continued.
Yes. After all, losing without even knowing how your defeat came about would certainly leave you with regrets.
Enough of you! Just disappear!
This movement shrinking in on himself becoming a fuse, Regulus leapt from the edge of the canal. Lacking sufficient jumping power, his body plunged into the water. However, his movements were unaffected by the flood, and he found himself with no water resistance. After confirming his behavior in the water, Subaru patted Emilia's shoulders.
Emilia! Right now!
Alhuma!
Receiving Subaru's instruction, Emilia gathered magic to release the icicles. So enormous that they needed to be gazed up at to be seen fully, the spears of ice were aimed directly at Regulus, forming an overhanging railing of ice to surround him as he surfaced.
I'd actually thought you'd try something, but no matter what you do, it's futile. Looks like no matter how many times you're taught, you'll never learn. What? Are you planning to stick with your mistakes? Without even that degree of wisdom, repeating the same thing over and over? Do you always treat others with such futility while despising them? Don't get carried away. How incomplete!
Regulus bared his teeth, cut down the railing of the ice, smashed it, and with overwhelming force, shattered it. The barrier collapsed with ease, and despite her best efforts, Emilia's magic could not sustain the cage of ice. But it was enough. This was fine.
I can't. I couldn't even buy time properly.
That's not right, Emilia-tan.
Seeing the ineffectiveness of her power, Emilia wore a gloomy face, but Subaru shook his head. A look from a different angle. This had been enough to accomplish Subaru's purpose.
That man's character is insidious. He can't help but crush what he despises, even if it's unnecessary to destroy whatever obstacle he's facing. He can't feel that he's won without shattering it completely.
Seeing ballots to fulfillment, spouting his self-satisfying rhetoric, was Regulus. The pitiable nature of his heart, the scarcity of his tolerance, and the volume of his vanity were plain to see.
In the first place, there was no need for him to break through the obstacle, but he took that superfluous action. Even a second, even a millisecond is the result.
With that 1 second, can you defeat Regulus?
As long as I accumulate them, I'll definitely show you victory. I'll peel off that monster skin from his body!
For this, Reinhard had laid the foundation, testing Regulus's heartbeat, conveying that it had no movement to Subaru. There was no heat, no heartbeat, no breath, and no outside influence from his surroundings. Although this was undoubtedly invincibility, its essence was not undefeatable.
Emilia! Over here!
Subaru took Emilia's wrist and crossed the dented alleyways with her. Emilia kept pace with Subaru as she turned back to attack Regulus with an icicle. Regulus, seeing the two flee, pursued with rage brewing in his chest.
Even after all of that boasting, why the hell are you running? Calling someone stupid, proclaiming that you'll kill them. Just how much do you plan on making fun of me? Who the hell do you think you are? You coward!
Since his physical abilities were no superior, the speed of the pursuing Regulus was little different from the speed of the escapees. Rather, it could be said that he was slower than Subaru. However, since he was blessed with unrelenting composition, the ceaselessly pursuing evil would eventually catch up.
Subaru, where are you running to?
Our destination is the church. Our target is Regulus's wives. In between...
Hearing Emilia's inquiry, he replied back. Suddenly, halfway through his words, he noticed from behind.
Stop paying attention to extraneous things, you!
Ah!
The distance that had existed until now vanished without a trace. Turning his head, Regulus had already appeared in front of him. Forcing an approach to only one step away, Regulus waved his hand towards him, and Subaru barely jerked his head out of the way. He felt that his opponent was already on his heels, so he swept up Emilia and approached a nearby wall, stepping on and along it in one motion.
Wow, wow, wow! Subaru's amazing!
Emilia-tan, hold tight to me!
Emilia, stunned by Subaru's acrobatics, hugged his back and wrapped her feet around his waist. Soft and fragrant, she filled Subaru with a fresh wave of energy. Kicking hard on the edge of the wall, he flew across it. The results of his practice in parkour were revealed, just gaining distance like this.
I've said already that you commoners' efforts are futile.
Saying so, Regulus touched the lower part of the wall Subaru was climbing with his palm. There was the sound of rock grinding, and the stone wall collapsed as if it were tofu. The wall lost its support and fell. Needless to say, the same happened to those climbing on the wall.
Ah!
In the process of falling, he yanked out his whip and flicked it without any real direction. The front end hooked onto something, and Subaru forcefully pulled his body upward. With a swing of his foot, he gave a hard kick the moment he touched the wall. Combined with the force of the reaction, the centrifugal force generated by the whip allowed his body to be thrown further and further, achieving an amazing climb with Emilia still on his back. At a closer glance, the two of them had arrived at a warehouse that had already lost almost half its volume. Subaru crashed into the balcony that protruded from the eaves and looked at his palm.
Wow! I didn't expect to achieve a brute force escape!
Subaru, in short, we just have to get to the church. The direction is...
No longer gazing at his palm split open with faint pain, he followed Emilia's voice to see the surroundings. Fortunately, the height of the balcony, in addition to Regulus's feats, allowed him to see everything clearly. Far, far in the distance, he could see the church that collapsed from Reinhard's first attack. Somehow, at some point, it had grown quite distant.
Damn it! We fled in the opposite direction. What now?
Is that it there?
It's right there. What about it?
Let's travel like this.
Emilia, upon hearing Subaru's response, clapped, and a bridge formed on the balcony. The mysterious blue and white bridge began from the balcony and connected through the alleys all the way to the church, imitating a large road in midair.
What?
Gazing up at the bridge made of frost, Regulus, who had expected the pair to drop down, was also taken aback. Quickly responding to Emilia's decision to solve their conundrum with a brute force method, Subaru stood up, clapping his hands on his thighs, and then going up the stairs leading to the icy path.
I'm not letting you go, you know!
Walking under the new icy construct, Regulus picked up a stone from the ground and tossed it at the bridge. The hastily built path received a critical hit, cracks immediately spreading across its entirety. The terrible collapse spread, shattering the bridge and transforming it into a tragic display of crystal light. Witnessing this, Regulus laughed devilishly, but...
We're the ones who are going to win, so it doesn't matter if you destroy the bridge.
What?
Scattering every which way were brilliant shards of ice, as Subaru slid forward on an ice structure created by Emilia. Using the slope of bridge as a launch pad, using the principles of a ski jump, they leapt over the alley and flew over Regulus toward the church.
Emilia-tan, you became so witty!
Maybe Subaru led me astray.
That statement shouldn't be used in response to praise!
Although he had a means of long-range attack, Regulus could only touch what was in reach of his arm's length. They kept well away from his figure, delirious with rage. Staring at the approaching church, Subaru's eyes narrowed.
What should we do when we meet the women in the church?
I don't know if they've been threatened, or if they really do admire him.
At Emilia's question, Subaru lowered his chin to his palm, interrupting himself. What emerged in his eyes were the women, shocked by Regulus's actions in the church. The fear he had seen then, if only it were genuine, thus he prayed. But if it really had been an act...
Forget the mind. It may be even that their hearts were stolen away. Heart in a literal sense, that is.
Greeting his face were bursts of wind blowing, and the height of the ice structure began to fall as it approached the church. Behind was Regulus giving chase. Reinhard's life hung in uncertainty. The chances of victory were slim, but the dilemma still steadily approached. Was everyone else doing fine? Clearly, he had no room to even ponder such questions, but he could not help but think of them. To take over the charge of the control tower from Gluttony, this was the battle between Julius, Ricardo, and Alphard.
El Clauzel!
With the power of the 6 colored quasi-spirits, a rainbow-colored radiance emanated from the tip of the knight's sword. What rolled out was a preemptive strike aiming straight for its opponent's death. Clauzel was a magical technique of the same type as Clarista, which had managed to damage even Petalgase's body. However, unlike Clarista, which had the destructive bright light stick to the sword itself, Clauzel was a long-range attack. The impression of the Sin Archbishops was still strong in Julius's mind thanks to Petalgase. The feeling which Julius has gotten while fighting the madman, the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, a huge sinner and someone who had given great suffering to the world for a long time, had been completely different from the current situation. That is, the fight with the current enemy was completely different. Julius Julius, who had obtained the title of Finest of Knights, often misunderstood people due to their behavior, but he believed in this so-called theory that all human nature was ultimately good. He believed that all human action was up to interpretation, but there were some things which humanity must think about. like the influence of one's party's actions over the others. Then, for Julius, the Sin Archbishop named Pedalcase Romane Conti and his self-conscious dolls, the witch cultists, had all been too overwhelming. Someone who could not understand that, who disregarded hard work and the efforts of others, would inevitably become an enemy for him. For Julius, the worst done by the witch cult to him was to harm his knightliness. No hidden tricks, no trump cards saved for the last. From the very beginning, Julius did not hesitate to cut down those devils. An extraordinary technique that simultaneously handled all 6 colors of magic with the help of 6 quasi-spirits. Not even the slightest of mismatch of magical power was allowed. This was established only after the bonding of the quasi-spirits, thanks to the efforts and talents of the genius spiritual arts user named Julius. This was not the exact same thing as what Roswell L. Mathers would do, who sat at the pinnacle of magic. This had been created by Julius, and was unique to Julius. At the first look, the magic did not feel too scary, and the opponent would be scattered away without an opportunity to rethink subsequently. Julius had one belief in his chest, that he must prioritize blowing away the enemy rather than investigating the incompatibility between them. The extremely bright destructive light shattered the stone pavement and preyed upon the arms of a small shadow. Long dark brown hair, dirty rags, dull shining daggers got swallowed up by the shine of the rainbow light.
This is surely something Nisama didn't expect. He has a weakness of turning away his eyes from what he doesn't want to see. Doesn't he?
What the?
As he collapsed onto the ground, Alfar's muttering voice could be heard. The blasphemer, with his long tongue hanging outside, kicked the ground with a posture low enough that it could almost be said that he was lying on the ground. The speed of the bright light would never be late enough to not reach its opponent. In order to avoid this approaching arrow, one would need a physical ability comparable to that of Reinhard, or...
We admire you, Nisama. Nisama, who hates to show his hard work to others, would use such devilish skills in desperation. How would we not know that?
What are you saying?
Thinking we wouldn't know? Julius Nisama is truly innocent, but we love that part of you.
Alfar jumped around the ground and avoided the magic, with a movement that suggested that he already knew that trump card would be used. Ricardo subsequently ran to strike Alfar, who had escaped the magic. But that pursuit too was a move which he had anticipated. Ricardo plunged into him in front of the river, as daggers collided and sparks scattered. Ricardo was overwhelmingly superior in strength. Alfar countered the strength difference with unimaginably skilled sword handling. The cobblestone broke by the hatchet's strike, and rained beside the blasphemer. At the same time, Ricardo cried out as Alfar slashed into his shaggy torso.
Look, a stub of dog meat. Hard and luscious meat should be made sticky and soft to make it easier to eat, to make it easier to bite, to make it easier to digest, to make it easier to shit out, to make it easier to decompose, to make it easier to fertilize vegetables. And after it makes it all that's so easy, the meat should be eaten to start the cycle of the food chain. Ah, how wonderful!
The speed of Alfard, as he strung along tongue-twisting words as he brandished daggers attached to both his arms, was something extraordinary. His growth period had not ended yet, and his body had still not toughened. However, his physical ability had contradicted those looks till now, as he ripped into Ricardo's body, who was all defensive.
Ricardo!
Fur like wires and thick muscles. Ricardo's body, which was like armor itself compared to the normal human body, had suffered no wound by any technique until now. Until Alfard's attack. With eyes wide open, Julius was stunned by looking at Ricardo's bleeding wound. Alfard attacked with high-speed moves, each move targeting and aiming precisely at the joints and thin parts of the fur. Regardless of the quality of Ricardo's body, if his key areas got attacked, he would get hurt, he would shed blood, and he would lose his life. At the moment Julius saw the bombardment of blows, Julius summoned the quasi-spirits once again. The slashes of wind mixed with the flames of a fire, and the sword commanded the quasi-spirits of 2 colors, Thea of fire and Aro of wind. From the side, a slash with a reddish flame headed towards Alphard.
Yes, we knew that pattern already too.
What?
That surprise is completely honest. Our stomach will not have any difficulty either.
However, Alphard was ridiculously unaffected by it, with one arm precisely attacking as if he had eyes on his back, to see whether what he thought would happen as he kicked into his empty torso. His heel penetrated into the abdominal muscles as if he broke into Julius, his body bending over with a scream. At the front, just when Ricardo started his counterattack, Alphard's toad launched itself right into his lower jaw.
How nice, how nice! This has become fun! That Nisama is, that Ricardo-san is, they both are fighting this great battle, and we are their opponent! Even though us, with our weak bodies, absolutely can't do it, can't reach it, can't see it, can't understand it, should have already given up in this position. To make it so fun! How unfair! Unfair! Unfair!
Julius and Ricardo fell to their knees at the same time. Alphard, who stopped his pursuit, repeatedly somersaulted onto the stone pavement, as if to keep the two under pressure. They must take his incredible skill and childlike brutality under consideration.
This is much more than what I've heard. The heck's that guy? It's pissing me off. The way he walks, the way he talks, everything about him's just so creepy.
Ricardo, who barely ever got hurt and barely had any older wounds, said that with a foggy voice while licking the wounds on his arms. Julius rose, taking heavy breaths, and agreed with Ricardo's anger as well.
It is the same as City Hall. No, just his behavior is still equally incomprehensible. It may be an attempt to mock us, but it is counterproductive and nothing else.
Even if you say that, it's always the human Nisama hiding his feelings of worry from the non-human Ricardo-san. No? We said that we already knew about that.
You bastard!
Clasping his hands, Alphard laughed uncontrollably, and Julius sent the quasi-spirit of water, Qua, under Ricardo to heal the latter's wounds as he stepped ahead.
Hey Julius, don't go out there!
Just stay there until the bleeding stops.
Pointing his knight sword forward, Julius dashed towards Alphard. However, the movement now was clearly not the same as the one before. In the sharp steps and slashes, Alphard, who received the first attack, felt his eyebrow get slightly slashed.
That is?
The power of the quasi-spirit of Yang, Een. And at the same time,
Alphard's question overlapped with the responding voice. Julius's long legs jumped up and kicked down Alphard's head, pushing down the blasphemer's cheeks into defeat. This time, his defense would not make it in time. His hanging arms lagged behind, and rolling his eyes, Alphard turned and desperately attempted to dodge.
That one right now was?
My quasi-spirit of Yang. The one with my sword is the quasi-spirit of Yin. It is a mutual partnership that improves my physical ability and diminishes your own. This was the first time for you, was it not?
Oh, as you'd expect! Julius-sama is wonderful! Still loaded with charm that neither we nor us knew about, isn't it?
With his cheeks dyed red, Alphard looked at Julius with flushed eyes. At the moment Julius frowned at that warm gaze, Alphard removed and threw away the daggers attached to his arms. A shrill sound echoed as they pounded on the cobblestone. Immediately afterwards, his heel broke the cobblestone.
As it seems like you cannot surprise us with swords, this time we intend to see it by using fists.
Alphard closed the distance in the blink of an eye, as he launched the bottom of his palm while twisting his waist. Julius countered it with his empty left hand, but the shock penetrated right through his arm into his chest. Unimaginably, the forceful lurch from the ground and the twisting of the waist had increased the destructive force of his palm strike, and Julius, with no time lag, was sent flying. If Subaru had witnessed this fight, he would have thought of a car accident. It was a violent sight, much like a runaway car with failed brakes, mowing down defenseless people.
Our fists that have taken down more than 88 people. We suppose they shook up Nisama down to his bones medullas. No?
Julius could not afford to respond to Alphard's crazed smile. His chest bones, his internal organs all creaked, blood flooded into his clothes, and his tall body got blown away. Ricardo, who was being treated, quickly responded to the situation.
Julius, watch out!
Ricardo hugged and defended Julius, who was going to crash into the wall head first, fully unprotected. Even the enormous dog got swallowed into the impact and was knocked into the building, crushing stone itself. Ricardo, who had rushed to help Julius, shook his head as a plume of dirt rose. The blood in his head concentrated on one side, and he spat out the blood in his throat to prevent his own choking.
Hey, spirits! Don't know if you can hear me, but your master's in trouble. Get to work. Think about me later.
Whether it was thanks to Ricardo's call or not, the blue light poured into its power into Julius's dying body. When he was at least made safe from dying, Ricardo jumped out in frustration into the brisk situation after he had taken a good break from the fight.
Welcome back! Would you like to have a meal? Would you like to have a treat? Or perhaps DINNER?
Get your tongue back in your mouth, brat! I'll teach you what happens when you make fun of adults just like the brats at our place.
Oh well. Let's not take it any further. We don't want a dog as a meal anyway. If you don't want to play with swords or fists, are you fine with this?
In the waterway behind Alphard, a plume of water rose in the shape of a whirlpool, which looked like the neck of a water dragon to Ricardo.
Sword skills, martial arts, and this time magic? Just what the heck are ya?
We are anonymous, non-practicing magicians who couldn't even be looked at with pride by our family. Something like that.
Immediately after Alphard rolled his tongue outside, the head of the water stream headed towards Ricardo. Although that was just water, its momentum and mass was enough to crush a living being's body. On top of that, there was Julius behind him, so he could not choose to avoid it either.
You've done it now. Ah!
Opening his large mouth and his body hooked firmly to the ground, Ricardo released a roar wave. This was an original roaring wave that could be produced via the cooperation of 2 of the 3 siblings that made up the deputy commanders of the Iron Fang. However, originally, Mimi had developed this technique by imitating Ricardo, and Ricardo argued that this was originally his. However, compared to Mimi, who reduced the burden by distributing it, this roaring wave, when used by a single person, was a huge burden to the body. The destructive roar burst out of Ricardo's throat as he felt muddy water fall on his body, which was clinging onto the ground.
Wow, amazing!
Unable to hear the voice of admiration, Ricardo's roar wave crashed into the muddy stream of water. The wave collided right from the front and splashed the water away, and water with a mass of several tons scattered and evaporated into mist. After a few seconds, the destroyed muddy stream hit the plaza like rain, flooding the stone pavement and sending the leaning Ricardo crashing down.
That sure was something. Even the edge of my mouth got a bit cut.
The residual damage itself left Ricardo blank for a long time, which further burdened him after the roar wave, his shoulders heaving due to his long breaths. Ricardo, however, still managed to get up because of his feelings. Alphard was completely unaffected, without showing any signs of exhaustion. He was just dancing there.
Amazing! It's been a while since we've seen someone endure that. So long that there's not a trace of it in either of ours or our memory. How nice. Quite nice. Pretty nice. Maybe it is nice. Isn't it nice? Possibly it is nice. Perhaps it is nice. Probably it is nice. Because it is probably nice.
Your repetitive speech ends here.
Well, it's Nisama's grand return. Scarily, cutely, inevitably.
Alphard shook his head. Julius was standing next to Ricardo. His face was pale, and his knight uniform was dyed in blood. His breath was even faintly stuttering, and it was completely impossible to say that he was in his top shape. Although that could not be said.
Thanks for the help, Ricardo.
I sure did help you. I'll have you report my efforts properly to the lady so that I can get that temporary bonus.
About that, I assure you that you can feel absolutely unworried about that from my side.
Grabbing his knight's sword, Julius tapped on Ricardo's shoulder and subsequently glanced at Alphard. Sensing that gaze, the blasphemer smiled with dyed cheeks and twisted his lips irritatingly. His facial expressions, actions, even his way of fighting, were all packed with a sense of creepiness and spook. Or perhaps that itself was related to his authority of gluttony.
With such prowess in using swords, martial arts, and even magic, why did you align with evil? That power could have been put to use for something else. Something better.
Somewhere else, huh? Giving some examples? What would Nisama consider in that?
Nisama. Even his way of addressing was unsettling. Every time Alphard's tongue touched it, every time he said that with a flamboyant tone and stuck-up attitude, that word lost its value for Julius. Even though he had no family members to call him that.
For example, a knight, a mercenary, a hero. Unkept power easily falls into the hands of evil, and strength turns into forceful violence. That's why.
We thought you'd say so. We thought you'd say that, Nisama. We thought that the Nisama we know, that the Nisama we trust, would say that. We thought so.
Abruptly putting a halt into the conversation, Alphard jumped and approached Julius. He held his knightsword vertically and slashed down that kick. As if he had plates of iron attached to his heels, the slash failed to do any damage. Alphard sharply turned and continued his barrage of kicks from a low angle as he swung and danced on the spot, as he further pushed Julius to make him crash into the scaffold. At his intense and strong moves, even Ricardo lost track of his timing and became unable to interrupt.
Do you remember when we were kids? When we had gotten sick and broken down? We had asked Nisama whether we could bring an apple from the tree in the garden.
Saying things on your own accord. Why would I remember? Stop enforcing your own arbitrary delusions onto others!
Us and Nisama were still small, and Nisama first said that it was impossible, told us to give up. Do you remember? Don't you remember? But we, just because Nisama had tried to stop us, ended up wanting that appa even more. When we had done what Nisama said was impossible, we thought that we did an amazing job. Our confidence increased. We really thought that!
What are you saying? I am unaware of any such things. Unaware!
Julius accepted his kicks. His heel, his round kick, his straight kick, his high jump kick, his somersault, his backspin kick with his knight's sword. His arms were numb, his internal organs were scarred with pain, and he could feel the taste of blood in his mouth. No, it was different from the taste of pure blood, as this was his blood mixed with vomit. He bit his lips. He, just now, for some reason, he could not help but listen carefully to Alphard's delusion.
Because of what happened afterwards, we are, Nisama is! We always thought about it. We always felt it, that it was different, that it was just some luggage. How that it used to be, how's that now? What a nice feeling. So it was such a feeling. That feels so nice. We finally get it!
I know absolutely nothing. Nothing about you!
Julius got pushed into becoming more and more violent. Holding back his knight's sword with immense strength, he tried to attack whenever he found a gap in Alphard's position, striking down, piercing into, kicking in, pounding, entangling, dodging. A slash died with anger and hostility cut through the air, and some of Alphard's hair, which were too late to avoid it, got slashed off and fell to the ground. Even still, it was not just a slash which should be paid attention to.
Ia, Kua, Aro, Eek, Ness, Een.
With the names of the quasi-spirits called out, they started spinning like a magical cast. The spirits contracted with the Spirit Knight. With their names called out, the 6 colors of the quasi-spirits increased in radiance, turning the mere affirmation of their existence into a powerful force and pouring it all into the opponent of their knight. The 6-colored light surrounded Alphard from all 6 directions, blocking any path to escape.
With this, it ends!
Julius had firm belief in his victory as Alphard could no longer escape. The power pushed straight through the middle of Alphard's chest.
Palm of the Fist King!
The dark palm in front of his chest collided with the knight's sword in between and crushed it into pieces. Debris scattered, and the deadly stab lost its effectiveness. However, there was magic approaching from all 6 directions.
Magic!
An unexpected and confusing magical power swelled up behind Alphard and slashed down all 6 of the approaching magical spells. Magic of one color clashed with the magic of that same color, and all magic got cancelled out. Finally, the eyes of Julius, who had supposedly sealed this attack's victory, opened.
Snake of the Twin Swords!
Alphard's toes tossed up a dagger, which he was supposed to have had thrown away. It had been pushed into this place by Julius's attack. Receiving the spinning blades with both of his hands, Alphard's body rotated. A storm of slashes blew up, and Julius used just his broken knight sword.
Nisama threw the appa out? That's why we hate Nisama!
An arm sharply cut from the elbow spun into the air and fell into the cobblestone, making a sound.